Eastern North Carolina is known for many positive assets, including world-class beaches, mild winters, hardworking people, and a favorable tax structure. But what we need is an economic engine for Eastern North Carolina to make businesses and industries clamor to locate in our area. First, let's take a look at our current assets. The North Carolina Railroad is a 317-mile state-owned rail corridor extending from Morehead City to Charlotte. The railroad carries over 70 freight trains offered by the Norfolk Southern Railway and 8 passenger trains daily. 22 miles of track needs to be restored between Wallace and Castle Hayne to have a rail system running from Wilmington to Charlotte. This needs to be a top priority. The fact that 2 railroad companies, CSX and Norfolk Southern, intersect at Goldsboro is often overlooked. Progress has been made in the past few years on connecting highways in Wayne County and in eastern North Carolina, but we can't stop now. Interstate 795 connecting Goldsboro to Interstate 95, completion to Interstate 40 must be a top priority. U.S. Highway 70 upgrading to freeway status from I-795 to Morehead City, and now we need the completion of Kinston and Havelock bypasses as soon as possible. The North Carolina Global Transpark, GTP, is a 2,500-acre industrial airport site situated strategically in eastern North Carolina. The GTP offers an ideal location for a variety of business types, especially companies involved in the aerospace sector and logistics. There are buildings and sites readily available. There is an airport and a rail connection to the Port of Morehead. It is a short distance to 2 major interstates, I-95 and I-40. And there are 5,775 acres permitted for development. The Port of Morehead is a vital and integral part of the future of eastern North Carolina. Morehead is one of the deepest ports on the U.S. East Coast and is located 4 miles from the Atlantic Ocean. A deep port is essential because this port has the attainable depth that is needed to accommodate larger ships. A unique tax credit is available to North Carolina port users. Access to Interstate 95 is available via U.S. Highway 70, as well as train service from Norfolk Southern. Investment in the Port of Morehead will literally and figuratively open new channels for new industries in eastern North Carolina. The Port of Wilmington is strategically located on the U.S. East Coast. Owned and operated by the North Carolina State Ports Authority, the Port of Wilmington offers terminal facilities serving container, bulk, and break bulk operations. Wilmington is one of the few South Atlantic ports with readily available berths and storage areas for containers and cargo. However, the rock bottom of the port limits the depth needed to accommodate larger ships. There is a proposed port for Brunswick County. The North Carolina International Terminal is a $2.2 billion port project planned for Brunswick County that would occupy 600 acres on the Cape Fear River just north of Southport. However, there is strong opposition to a new port at Southport and currently has been shelved. The rivers of eastern North Carolina, the Pamlico and the Neuse, as well as the Tar, Black, and Cape Fear rivers, all offer an abundant water source for development. Each area also offers a variety of recreational activities such as camping, fishing, boating, and swimming. Military bases bring prosperity to eastern North Carolina. We've benefited in many ways from their presence. This is the primary economic engine for our area. We must develop an additional economic engine to minimize the negative impact of a downsizing of military forecast for the near future. Now that we've looked at our current assets, let's form a vision of our future. In recent years, our area has lost political influence. We must realize the necessity of forming a coalition in order to gain the funding we need. We must unite and urge surrounding cities and counties to support Vision ENC 2030. With political influence, we can get things done, such as completing transportation improvements in eastern North Carolina to include rail, ports, and highways to provide the infrastructure necessary for Vision ENC 2030 to succeed, expanding the port in Morehead, developing an inland port in eastern North Carolina. Eastern North Carolina has a long and proud heritage with the presence of military installations in the region. These installations bring thousands of new personnel and defense contractors to the region. The defense industry encompasses 7% of North Carolina's statewide gross domestic product, GDP, and brings billions of dollars into the state annually. We need to improve and increase our roadway and rail system to enhance the ability of military travel in the eastern part of North Carolina. That is why we need to develop and promote the North Carolina Defense Logistics Initiative to military, business, and government leaders. Tourism is a top industry in North Carolina. We should create cruise terminals at Wilmington and/or Morehead ports to support tourism. Let's look at inland ports, linking freight and regional economic development. So, first, let's answer the question, what is an inland port? It's a physical site located away from traditional land, air, and coastal borders. The idea is to move the time-consuming sorting and processing of containers inland, away from congested seaports. An inland port could speed the flow of cargo between ships and major land transportation networks, which carry goods to the rest of the country. Let's look at the process. A ship arrives at port and containers are offloaded onto rail cars for immediate shipment to inland port. The inland port sorts and transfers to a specific rail or trucking company. Does this work? Does it increase the container market share? Well, let's look at neighboring states invested heavily in ports and inland ports. Virginia has the East Coast container market share of 12.39%. That's over 343,000 jobs, $13.5 billion income, $41.1 billion in revenue, and $1.2 billion in taxes. South Carolina has a 9.29% of the East Coast container market share. Georgia has an East Coast container market share of 18.74%, 352,000 jobs, $18.5 billion in income, $66.9 billion in revenue, and $2.5 billion in taxes. And North Carolina, well, we have an East Coast container market share of a dismal 1.78%. We have failed to reap the benefits because we were short-sighted and did not invest in our ports. Our ports and inland ports can bring hundreds of thousands of jobs, billions in economic production, and billions in tax revenue. North Carolina ports could easily improve their container volume by 1 million units. This additional volume would add at least 164,000 jobs. And if we handle 2 million containers, which are close to what Charleston, Savannah, and Norfolk handle today, then we too could be experiencing a $44 billion economic impact. This is not theory. It's already happening in our sister states. We touched briefly on the North Carolina Defense Logistic Initiative earlier, but let's focus a little more on what this initiative could do for our area. It could produce thousands of jobs for eastern North Carolina. It could improve the economy, improve the tax base, attract supporting industries and manufacturing firms. Let's look at some facts. The United States is expected to make $450 billion in cuts to the defense budget over the next decade. North Carolina is home to 118,083 troops. North Carolina bases are within 90 miles of both ports. North Carolina is ranked third with military personnel, but 29th in military contracts awarded. Those are 2010 figures. North Carolina can save the military millions of dollars where they ship military vehicles for repair and reconditioning. Well, what can be done? Let's look at the current situation. The Army and the Marines each have 2 repair depots, one on each coast. Marine ground vehicles from deployment are received via the port of Jacksonville, Florida, and shipped to Georgia for repair and reconditioning. They are then shipped to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. Army ground vehicles from deployment are received via the port of Charleston, South Carolina, and shipped to Alabama for repair and reconditioning. They are then shipped to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. The Army vehicles travel 878 miles, and the Marine vehicles travel 1,047 miles. Why can't we do the repairs in North Carolina? How could Eastern North Carolina develop a program to offer these same services performed at area facilities? Set up a military logistics operational center. Develop locations within Eastern North Carolina for specialization by type of vehicle. Goldsboro has the intersection of rail lines and a rail yard for loading heavy units. Use the ports of Wilmington and Morehead as receiving ports for vehicles from deployment. From these 2 ports, vehicles could be delivered to repair locations and then onto bases by rail, truck, or even driven. The vehicles are transported 165 miles, which is an 82% savings in miles traveled. Again, North Carolina has several advantages available for use by the military. Railroads that are operating under 50% capacity. Highways that are utilized at 40% capacity. 2 ports that are operating at 30% of capacity and located near military bases. The Global Transpark is an excellent military asset. Now let's look at port improvements for cruise ships. Why? Well, jobs, jobs, and more jobs. Cruise ships bring thousands of tourists to our coastal cities, which is a huge impact on the local economy. So why should we implement Vision ENC 2030? Well, to complement and to protect our primary economic engine, our military bases, to ensure our region would survive a catastrophic military downsizing, to provide the economic opportunities for our families in eastern North Carolina, and to provide the increased tax base, which will lower property taxes on individual property owners. Action items would include getting surrounding cities and counties to join Vision ENC 2030. Individual counties cannot do it alone. We must join together to obtain the funding for infrastructure improvements to bring the growth and jobs we all need. Getting legislative support to complete the rail from Castle Hayne to Wallace. Building bypass and rail north of the existing line in Moorhead. Finding ways to move up the improvements and construction of bypasses on US 70 to Moorhead. Obtaining funding to complete I-795 to I-40. Deciding on a location for an inland port, Goldsboro at the rail intersection or the Transpark. Creating and obtaining funding for the North Carolina Defense Logistics Initiative. Dredging the shipping channel to 50 feet in Moorhead to accommodate the larger ships. Or building and improving ports for cruise ship terminals. When do we start? We start today. Pledge your support to join Vision ENC 2030 for a brighter Eastern North Carolina.